Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Mark Friesen. He's the grizzly patriot fighting for freedom in Canada. He's the host of Live with Grizz on YouTube at Mark Friesen Grizzly Patriot, FFCS. He's the founder of the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty online at ffcs.info. He ran in the most recent federal election for the People's Party of Canada. You can follow him on Twitter at MarkFriesen08 and on Facebook at Mark Friesen PPC. Mark, welcome to the Goddard Report.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
First of all, Mark, where are you?
I'm in Saskatoon.
And there's no other city in the world named that, so we don't have to say Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, first of all, can you tell us about the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty?
Yeah, so I, coming out of the federal election, not that I wasn't conscious of the fact before, but it really drove home the idea that people are very uninformed. They go to the voting box very uninformed and ill-informed. And so I thought, the best way to reach the masses is from a nonpartisan perspective and from an organization that's dedicated to opposing globalism and the globalist agenda, as well as educating and informing Canadians of that agenda and the consequences therein. So I thought, well, let's create this non-government organization, this NGO, the only NGO in Canada that exists that opposes the globalist and the globalist agenda. And let's see if we can reach the masses and with some information that's counter to what they're all hearing on mainstream media. So we created it, and our mission is just that: is to educate and inform Canadians about what's really happening and how the consequences that they're experiencing are related to the greater agenda. I mean, everything that Canadians are experiencing in a negative way is related to that agenda, and they need to understand where it comes from. So to achieve this mission, we sort of thought, well, okay, let's do a cross-Canada tour with some bigger name speakers that are experienced and have some expertise in this field or this area. And, let's expose people to some information. Unfortunately, right after we were created, COVID hit. So that sort of put a damper on things as far as achieving our mission. So we really have been working really quite hard online. And, we've gotten ourselves involved in some protests regarding lockdowns and COVID measures. In support of folks that want to voice their opinion and again get some information out that isn't common in the mainstream media. So we've had to adjust and adapt to the situation, but essentially that's what we're all about, and we'll continue on working like I said, online, and hopefully at some point in the near future we can start getting to some town hall and speaking engagements and really start getting our message out.
How is the fight for freedom in Canada going?
Slowly but surely. It's interesting. I've been in this arena around globalism for quite a long time, and researching and studying and trying to understand it for myself. And I got to the point where, okay, so I get it. I know what's happening. Everyone else needs to get it. And when we talk about freedom, it really is what this all boils down to, because if the globalists, if the UN, if the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset are successful in achieving the goals that they've stated, you can say goodbye to our freedoms, you can say goodbye to our way of life, and really, ultimately, Western civilization.
On Monday, the Trudeau government had an update on the economy and the fiscal situation. What did you make of it?
Well, between how they spin and how they present narrative, the reality is that we are in a whole lot of trouble. And that the second that our government doesn't recognize that, alarm bells and flags should be going up everywhere. We're over $1 trillion in debt now, in large part to the COVID response that, we're in dire situation, and things need to be turned around here very quickly. And so I take everything I hear from the Trudeau government and Trudeau himself with an enormous grain of salt. It's probably a rock of salt. It's all about spin and management, narrative management. There's no reality coming from any of our establishment at this point.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland yesterday alluded to COVID-19 ending in the spring of 2021. How would she know that?
Well, that we're on the edge of a rabbit hole on that question because, as they've admitted, as Trudeau admitted to the world, that they are using the opportunity that COVID has created to for a reset and to reimagine our economy and to achieve the goals of sustainable development. Those are his words, not mine. And of course, once he felt pushback from those words, he then referred to himself, I guess, as a conspiracy theorist. At the end of the day, whether COVID was created, and there's a school of thought that thinks that it was purposely initiated and released. The other school of thought is it wasn't. But regardless, they are most definitely taking the opportunity and using the pandemic, such as it is, to achieve a lot of their goals and start bringing in a lot of their goals. And a lot of it is through social engineering. So when Chrystia Freeland says that it's going to be over in spring of 2021, exactly, how does she know that? What does she know that the rest of us don't know? Is she basing that simply on the fact that there's word of vaccines coming out and that's going to solve the problem? What happens with COVID-20 or 21 or 22? Do we go through this whole thing again? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered in that statement, and we simply won't get the answers to those questions.
Well, colds and the flu are all coronaviruses. Does that mean the next time another kind of flu or cold comes out, we shut down the whole country again?
Well, that's just it. And this has been so effective in socially engineering the masses in that are, fearful and in panic mode, that they've been able to take a lot of our freedoms and a lot of our liberties away, again, as part of the social engineering the masses. And who's to say that COVID-20 doesn't come around the corner, COVID-21, and then we go through this all again waiting for another vaccine. And when does it end? Well, apparently never. And when you understand that the coronavirus is essentially the flu, as scientists have identified and told us, then it really starts to make you wonder what's behind all of this.
We'll have more with Mark Friesen right after this.
Value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mark Friesen. Mark, are the Great Reset, UN Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 currently being pushed in Canada? And can you just briefly tell us what those are?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. The longer answer is these agenda goals have been pushed and made part of the federal government, provincial government, municipal governments for a long time. This isn't anything new. What's changed is they are actually openly stating that these are the goals they want to achieve. They're openly stating that they need a great reset. So, yeah, I mean, do they exist? Absolutely they exist. Are they in place? Absolutely. I believe we've been under global governance since at least 2015, when Trudeau was elected as Prime Minister. 1 month before that election, Prime Minister Harper signed on to the Sustainable Development Agenda, Transforming Our World is what they called it. And that was, like I said, 1 month before the election, which left the door completely wide open for Trudeau then, once he got elected, to start complying with the agenda that's been written by the UN, an unelected foreign body. So I truly believe that we've been under a form of global governance since that date. If you look at any of the policies that Trudeau has brought in, any of the regulations, any actions that his government takes are all in line with Sustainable Development Agenda. And so when you talk about the Sustainable Development Agenda and what it is, I mean, it's been in development since the late 60s. The Club of Rome, Rockefeller, Rothschilds, that group, and this isn't me creating this isn't theory, this is all open source knowledge. They started this, they came out with an agenda, and there's a book called Limits to Growth that was written by that group and heavily promoted. And so that was where it really initiated. It grew into, originally Agenda 21, which was signed by Mulroney in 1992 at the Rio Summit. They call it the Rio Declaration. That was essentially Agenda 21 being brought in and accepted by our government and many others. And so it's been in this development phase for a very long time. And of course, it's gone through its evolution and their changes from Agenda 21 to the Millennial Goals to Sustainable Development and into its current incarnation. So it's definitely not a conspiracy theory. It's definitely, you can call it conspiracy fact. And then then you bring in and enter Great Reset, which is a relatively new, narrative or verbiage that they're using, and of course, through the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab actually wrote a book. Many people maybe are not aware, but he wrote a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset, connecting, the pandemic with the Great Reset. And so when you look at the Great Reset, it's essentially saying the same thing as the Sustainable Development Agenda. They're just promoting it in a little different way from a little different perspective, but it's exactly the same thing. And funny enough, the reason I can say that with authority is the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab signed an agreement, a partnership with the UN and the Sustainable Development Agenda in June of 2019, 6 months before COVID. So, all of this connects, all of this aligns, and all this information is open. This is, again, I have to stress that none of what I'm saying is theory. It's all fact-based. It can all be sourced and checked and fact-checked, till the cows come home, and you'll find all the information you need is right there. And this is the stage that they're at. They're basically, this has all been in development for so long, for a long time through our municipalities, putting in a lot of this agenda items. But they're at the stage now where they have to market it and they have to promote it, to ensure that the population is at least in majority, in acceptance of all of these transformative changes that we can expect.
Well, we have Vancouver City Council who basically wants to ban cars from the city core. If you don't ride a bicycle or walk, then you just don't count. Is that the kind of things that we're seeing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And actually, Vancouver was the first city to sign on to ICLEI, which is a group of cities around the world that have signed on to this agenda. And you can call them partner cities, you can call them smart cities, strong cities, different language they use, but it all means the same thing. There's a number of Canadian cities now that have bought into this agenda and bought into this plan. And you can see it, just as an example that you mentioned. And then, in Saskatoon, I can give you an on-the-ground example. We have, we're a city that's winter 6 months of the year and snow for most of that 6 months and ice and you name it. We might have 12 people in the city of 250,000 that ride a bike in the winter, and yet we're shutting down streets to accommodate bike lanes. And we're putting out budgets not for just one walking lane, but now a walking lane, and we also now have a bike lane or sidewalks, alongside streets. Incredible amount of money being spent for something that doesn't make sense for Saskatoon. And so all you have to do is then, if you want to research and understand this, is look at the new urban agenda and the policies where they state clearly this unelected foreign entity creating policy, not in the best interest of our country, where they state very simply that you will prioritize your transportation within city limits, prioritizing cycling and pedestrian traffic over traditional vehicular traffic. This is their plan. This is what they're doing, and this is what we're seeing. It's happening. And this is only one example. There's so many different examples that we could use. But yeah, so it's happening. It's on the ground, and it's probably been happening unbeknownst to most citizens since at least 92.
We'll have more with Mark Friesen right after this.
Aven Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aven's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avenresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mark Friesen. Mark, is the push for gun control a red flag?
Well, it's definitely an indicator. Again, as I say, all of these issues that are affecting Canadians, across the country, are all related to the UN and its agenda. And one of those agenda items is under a small arms treaty that was signed. And it basically identifies civilian gun ownership as being a very strong hindrance in them achieving the goals of sustainable development. And so they actively want to remove the ability to citizens to own firearms. Of course, they're starting with the big bad boys, the ones that they classify as assault rifles. But that's not where it's going to end. It'll continue. It'll keep moving forward. You can't hit the population with a sledgehammer of regulations off the top because they will obviously resist and fight back. But it's all about drip, 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 slowly taking your rights, your freedoms, your quote unquote privileges, to gun ownership. And so that's just part of the package, but it's definitely a big part of the package.
Well, you take a look at the gun violence in Canada, it's handguns doing it. Handguns, for the most part, have already been banned in the nation. What else can they do?
Well, that's it. And so this has nothing to do with crime. That's the narrative that the sleepy Canadian wants to hear. It's perception. It's everything they put out there is based on perception, based on narrative rather than the reality. And the reality is that gun crime isn't fixed by making guns illegal. Gun crime obviously there's deeper issues that need to be dealt with. But it sells, and it's a narrative that sells, and to a good portion of the population, unfortunately. And but here again, you have another policy, another agenda item that's created by an unelected foreign entity that doesn't have the best interests or understanding of of countries like Canada, where, you know, in a good portion of our country, people use guns sometimes on a daily basis, and they use it for many different reasons, which should be none of the government's business. But, you know, again, when you have that entity that's creating this policy, a lot of these things will never make sense to Canadians, but they just, unfortunately, at this point, don't understand the connection.
Well, I grew up on a homestead just north of Peace River, and believe me, that 303 was needed because bears like to try to live under your house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally.
Yep.
Are the Canadian economy and small businesses being wiped out by design?
Well, you know, I often use this quote to answer this particular question, and the quote comes from an individual by the name of Christiana Figueres. And as she was leaving the one of the agencies within the UN, she made the statement that, and it was in regards to climate change, and her statement was, this has almost nothing to do with climate change and everything to do with system change. A system where we move away, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, where we move away from capitalism, free market, to a socialist model. So this is their agenda, and one of the ways to achieve this agenda is obviously destroying small business. And you know, some people confuse the idea of free market capitalism with what they've been exposed to in the last number of years, and that is the furthest thing from free market capitalism. What we've been seeing is this global crony capitalism, which essentially is just fascism. This whole private-public partnerships that they've put together, that's government working with corporations, global corporations, multinational corporations, to socially engineer the masses, to move them in the direction they need them to move in. And that does not include small business. Of course, small business is really hard for them to work with, hard for them to get them to play ball. And so the easiest thing in this agenda is to destroy small business, destroy the free market, destroy self-reliance and self-determination. These are all tenets of Western civilization, which is completely under attack. And so the best way to usher in socialism is to destroy small business and make people dependent on government, and not national government, but a global government. And so, yeah, the answer is absolutely yes, there is an attack on small business, and people need to recognize that. Small business owners need to recognize that. And as you can see through this whole COVID farce, that the small business is the target, and small businesses are going under in droves, and this runs perfectly in line with the agenda to destroy free market capitalism.
We've heard COVID-19 described as a pandemic and also as a hoax. Do you think the lockdowns and mask mandates are about a virus?
Absolutely not. I don't believe that any of it. I believe that they're using it, as they've stated themselves, to usher in this reset, usher in sustainable development goals. And it's all part of social engineering. It's all part of controlling the populace. You know, we're looking at a virus, and there's even some school of thought that say it isn't really a virus, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, I'm not an expert, I'm not a scientist, so I'll just call it a virus. But it's a coronavirus. That is the flu. The common flu that we've all experienced for many years is in the family of coronavirus. So I think there is some validity that it may be a bit of a worse flu than we're used to. But when we have 99.7% recovery rate for anybody under the age of 80, you know, that's an alarm bell that says, hey, what are we doing? Why are we killing the economy over this? And that's not to suggest that I'm not caring of the elderly, but the reality is the elderly are always vulnerable to the flu, and the elderly, in some cases, die from the flu in numbers that are relatively similar to the numbers we're seeing now. Then of course you add in this PCR test that's testing and giving this idea that this is a pandemic and the cases are going up. Well, the PCR test has been proven in court that it's unreliable, and you can't rely on the PCR test. In fact, the guy who designed this test and created this test openly stated, do not use this to test for disease or test for sickness or illness. And so when you start compiling all of these things, you start to, you really have to start to wonder, well, what the hell is going on? And I'm convinced that they're just simply using this pandemic to achieve and usher in their goals through social engineering and control.
Is there some irony here that this so-called pandemic is being used to destroy the middle class, small business, which creates the middle class, whereas the Black Plague is credited with creating the middle class because it created such a labor shortage that you could charge for your labor a decent amount and put together a firm that would organize that labor so that all of a sudden people didn't live in just one little cottage. They actually created homes that had rooms for all the individuals. So again, is there an irony here that now they're going to use a virus excuse to destroy what was created by a virus?
Well, absolutely. And the irony is obvious, and it's in our face. I mean, you look at Adamson Barbecue, a small business owner, has a small little restaurant there. He can't remain open, but yet you go down the street to Costco, to a globalist multinational company, and wide open, there's 300-400 people in there shopping and buying their lunch at the cafeteria. And a small business owner down the street can't run a barbecue joint. I mean, it's so obvious to anybody that has an understanding of what's happening. But it is, and again, it's the destruction of the industrialized world. I mean, Maurice Strong, another one of the Club of Rome people that Pierre Elliott Trudeau appointed to that entity, he stated very clearly that their goal is to destroy the industrialized world, that it lays upon them to be the people that we have to bring down the industrialized world if we're going to achieve all of these goals. And so we're seeing it in action. They're using COVID to destroy the middle class, to destroy small business, and make everyone dependent on government, global governance. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just another indicator.
Can you tell us about the mall tour you did this past weekend?
Yeah, it was a couple of weekends ago, and so we decided, like, I'm part of a rally group here in Saskatoon, or a freedom fighter group, or whatever you want to call us. The media likes to call us anti-maskers, but that's so minimizing. It's ridiculous. But so yeah, we decided to shake things up a little bit. We walked through a mall here in Saskatoon, of course, without our masks, and caused quite a stir in the media. And of course, they framed us in a number of different ways. A lot of people actually in the mall were screaming at us, telling us that they hoped we die from the virus, and quite offensive things I can't repeat on the air. But yeah, I mean, it was, it got some people thinking. It got the discussion into the media and onto social media through their posts, which was good. And so mission accomplished. The discussion has moved forward, and there's a lot more people asking a lot more questions. So, we have to get creative in these things. We can't just stand on a street corner with a sign. We gotta shake things up a little bit.
Is it possible Canada is now under UN control and being run by chief medical health officers instead of the Prime Minister and the premiers?
Oh, absolutely. And this goes back to earlier in our discussion. I'm convinced we're under global governance. I look at Scott Moe as the example, the Premier of Saskatchewan. And I've met Scott a couple occasions. And he seems like a normal, sort of decent guy. Family values and all that good stuff. But I really don't think he understands the position that he's in. I don't think he understands the role that he's playing. I think he gets his advice from his chief medical officer, and he makes decisions based on that, and, of course, the effectiveness that the media has had in creating this fear and this panic in people. So now he's playing to that, and he has to, as a politician, if he wants to keep his job and be politically expedient, then that's what he's going to do. Unfortunately, across the board in our country, we don't have any leaders anymore. Nobody leads doing the right thing. Our leaders, so-called leaders, they lead from the rear. They wait for the media to establish the narrative. They wait for the media to establish public opinion. and then they pander to that public opinion. Now, of course, this theater that they create, that they're, one party's different than the other, well, that's exactly what it is. It's theater. They're all just pandering to public opinion that's established by the media, and that's how they lead. So to me, that's not leading. Nobody's leading. Nobody's actually standing up and saying, we need to have a public debate around these things. We need to involve opposing opinions and opposing evidence that shows that we're not actually taking the right course of action here. But nobody's doing that. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be that guy, especially if they're an elected representative. They just want to go under the wire and get through it unscathed politically. And that's killing our country.
Would it be fair to say possible crimes are being committed, and whose job would it be to investigate them?
Yeah, I think there's probably some crimes being committed. I mean, I look at it, from my perspective. We have a constitution, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and in that Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we are guaranteed these rights subject to the government demonstrably or showing or proving that the measures taken to limit these rights are appropriate for the circumstance. Now, no government that I'm aware of has provided any of this evidence. So if you want to talk about crimes being committed, I think there's an enormous crime being committed against the Canadian public, against Canadian citizens who are being charged, who are being ticketed, who are being, in some cases, hauled off to jail simply for exercising their rights guaranteed under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So if, we have these decisions being made that aren't being made with any proof or any open or transparent debate, and these measures being taken against people. So I think that's a huge crime right there that our governments are committing, ignoring our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I think, there's some responsibility has to be put on the police as well, because they all took an oath. They didn't take that oath or give an oath to their supervisors or their chief of police or the government. They took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and to the Canadian people. And if, they're in a position of power, they're in a position of authority, and they should be taking their oath very seriously when they're giving and issuing tickets, when they're carting people off to jail for simply exercising their rights under that Constitution. So I would see that as a crime as well. And so, when you look at it from a big picture, there's potentially a lot of crime happening by the government against the people.
We've heard the RCMP in Burnaby is now checking the ID of people in bars and restaurants to see if they're staying in the same house, the same household, or give them a ticket because they're not the same household getting together.
Yeah, it's pure insanity. I have a story of a guy who I know personally. He went to the airport. He had a flight booked to go to Toronto. He got to the airport, and I'll make a long story short. He got to the airport. They said he couldn't board the flight, and he asked why. He said, "Well, because of his previous positions regarding masks." So now they're precluding him from legally getting on an airplane, boarding an airplane, because of his thoughts and his conscience. Well, that's guaranteed under the Charter, and yet, even further to that, they sent him a letter outlining certain points that he has sort of broken on a social level, where this is why he's precluded from boarding an airplane. We're in a social credit system all of a sudden. We're in communist China, where you have to live up to these, not just follow the laws, you actually have to live up to these social contracts that are created by outside of any legal framework. And this is what our corporations are now imposing upon us. We're living in this upside down, crazy world.
We did an interview last week with Martin Armstrong from ArmstrongEconomics.com. He predicts Trudeau will not be successful in implementing communism in Canada, which is great news. But how do we ensure Canada does not become communist?
Well, I think there's a little bit of it already here. I disagree a little bit with Armstrong in that if we don't stand up, and if we don't exercise our rights under our Constitution and our Charter, and basic human rights, if we don't exercise those, we are headed to a communist dictatorship, and not a national communism, a global communism, as we've discussed earlier. So I'm not quite as confident. I'm confident in that we could definitely oppose it and reject it, of course, but that's going to take a lot of people standing up to this very soon. So, you know, I think it's we're already kind of there. We're not fully there, but that's the direction we're headed, and we have to have people standing up and opposing this en masse.
Do we have what is referred to as fake news, controlled media, and social media in Canada?
Absolutely, 100%. Our media in Canada is probably some of the worst in the world. We have, of course, the CBC, which is basically a propaganda arm for the government, and then we have all the mainstream media who have all been bought off. I mean, the CBC is fully taxpayer funded, over $1 billion. But then you have all of the other media outlets, Global, CTV, you know, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, all the major media outlets. They're all funded as well. They're all, you know, subsidized through our tax dollars. Unfortunately, they don't speak for the people. They speak the narrative that the government wants them to speak and needs them to speak. In fact, it's so bad that there's something called, and this is, a lot of people don't know this or understand it, but there's actually a compact within the UN agenda. It's called the Media Compact. And this is where they have brought in all the media conglomerates who have all agreed that they're going to maintain consistency of narrative. This is why when you hear, you know, we've all seen the videos of, you know, in American media, where at one place they're saying one thing and then they tap into all these other news outlets that are reading exactly the same script. Well, exactly the same thing happens in Canada. You know, they're issued their narrative and this is what they're going to say. I can listen to the news in Saskatoon and then listen to the news in Edmonton or Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto, wherever, and the major stories, the major narrative, the top stories, national and international, are all going to be exactly the same, right? And so they've locked down this whole narrative. There's no opposing viewpoints ever allowed, and they all just promote the same narrative, the same perspective, the same, you know, the same stories. I mean, they're telling us what the news is instead of reporting the news like we think they used to do. And so, yeah, I mean, they've absolutely locked it down, and that bleeds into social media. You have social media monsters like Facebook and Twitter and Google and YouTube, where if you say anything out of school, you know, they're burning your books. And I say that on purpose. They deplatform you. They can't have information that opposes the overall narrative, so they simply deplatform you, or they censor you, or they ban you, or whatever mechanism they use. And so yeah, so here we are. The media, social media has the narrative locked down, which makes it incredibly hard for the masses, to no fault of their own, to be exposed to opposing viewpoints, to be exposed to, you know, actual science and different evidence, and it's completely limiting any discussion or any public forum where these things can be debated. It's just, this is the narrative, and don't stray from it, and just listen to us, because we'll be able to figure this out for you, and we've got this all under control. And that's why we see our public is so uninformed, even up to and including going to the voter booth.
We're hearing more and more about voter fraud in the U.S. election. It looks like the voting machines and software are used in Canada. Are you confident that any elections in Canada, municipal, provincial, or federal, have formed legitimate governments?
I have zero confidence. You know, the federal one is an interesting one that deserves some more scrutiny. Of course, you know, within the federal election, we still apparently hand count the ballots, and I seen it. I went through it. But what happens to those ballots after? You know, so there's definitely an ability for some fraud and corruption there. But more concerning is our provincial elections, our municipal elections is a big one. A lot of the municipalities are using these systems like Dominion. Some of them come right from Dominion. Others are just partners therein or have some other association, but they're called something else. we just had a situation in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon here. We just had a municipal election, and one of the fellows that ran was doing very well leading up to the end of the night and ballots coming in. And he was ahead by 200 and some votes. And then all of a sudden the mail-in came in, and he lost by 56 to an incumbent that's been around for 20 years. And they use a system called election systems and software. So, there's definitely a concern. I think Canadians need to pay attention. I think they need to look at what's happening in the States and really dive in to see what's happening in Canada, because, this agenda, and this is all leads back to globalism, this whole election with Donald Trump and the fraud and the corruption that's being exposed there, it's all about getting the people in place that they need to achieve their goals. And this is the perfect example, and this is hopefully one of the things that exposes all of this corruption that they're using to get the right people in. They'll do anything to get the right people in to forward the agenda.
We're hearing more and more about corruption in Canada. When corruption becomes extremely widespread, does it cause society to break down?
Absolutely it does. I mean, I'm actually... They've been at this for so long, and there's been this movement. You see, people need to understand, too, that this whole globalist agenda is a convergence of communism and fascism and Islamism, ultimately anything that leads to this totalitarian, authoritarian, globalist rule. So when you understand that, you understand the players in this. So there's the communist element who has been at work in our country and across the Western world for 100 years. And so all of this leads to the degradation and corruption, not only of our politics and our politicians, but it's led to the corruption of our society. And the values that Western civilization is founded upon, of course, Christian values, completely been destroyed, and the values of individual freedom and liberty and justice and prosperity, all of these values that we claim to cherish have been ignored and have been whittled down and degraded, and to the point where when you see the corruption, when it's exposed at the political level, you have a society that's apathetic. You have a society that is just as corrupt. And so how do you fix that if your society has been corrupted? So I think that's a huge problem for us. My good friend Salim Mansour always says that, politics is downstream from culture, and he's absolutely right. It is. And so we have to work very hard in changing narratives, changing perception, ultimately changing the culture, because our culture is it's leading the way for the globalists to achieve this transformative change that they want.
Could Canada end up balkanized, and if it did, who would that benefit?
Well, it sure wouldn't benefit anyone in Canada. I know there's the big separatist movement out in Alberta and parts of Saskatchewan, and I get it. I live in the West. I'm a Western boy. I'm a prairie boy. Been frustrated at the federal government and their treatment of the West for many years, as long as I can remember. But I also understand that separation is exactly what the globalists want. All of the policies that they've been coming out with to really upset and anger the West is coming on purpose. They want to see the destruction of our country. They want to see it fractured. They want to see the division. And then they want they want us to be balkanized. They want us to be separate entities, because they're much easier to handle and much easier to manipulate. And once you've created these smaller entities who are struggling, in trade or in the global economy, of course they become desperate. And then when you're desperate, what do? You rely on somebody else. And that's exactly what the UN wants. That's exactly the situation they want to create. So the response to everything that's happened from the separatists is exactly what the globalists bargained for. It's exactly what they planned for. They want this separation. They want this balkanization. They want people to be divided. And we have to fight against that. And the best way to fight against that is to remember our values, the core values that we all share across this country and throughout Western civilization, and that is freedom, liberty, justice, prosperity, equality under the law, compassion, tolerance, all these things that bring us together that we can actually unite around is exactly what's under attack. So we need to unite around these values and defend those values against the common enemy, which is globalism and the globalist agenda. Once we do that, then we can unite as a nation, we can stay strong as a nation, and we can prosper as a nation and maintain all of the freedoms that we claim to cherish.
It looks like some U.S. politicians have been selling out the U.S. for a long time. Does it look like Canada, the provinces, and the country's cities are being sold out?
Absolutely, they're being sold out. And I would suggest sometimes unwittingly, and sometimes wittingly. I think, any municipal government, for example, I'll use Saskatoon. We just had the election. Our mayor and city council were mostly reelected. But since this administration has been in power a little over 4 years ago, they have every policy that they've come out with is in line with a global entity and its agenda. And so, to me, that's traitorous. You are complying with policy and an agenda that was developed not in the best interest of Saskatoon, not in the best interest of Saskatchewan, and not in the best interest of our country. These are globalist policies, in their view, in the best interest of the globe, and completely ignores the values and principles and needs or wants of the local community. So any politician that has agreed to this, that has signed on to these partnerships, is not serving the community they're elected to serve. They're serving a globalist agenda.
For an evil group to take over the world, would they need to control elections and the media?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, what better way to get Donald Trump, who's essentially the tip of the spear against globalism, and in favor of strong nationalist policy and policy that, protects the values of that country and the nation state, of course that attack is going to be focused on him. That's why we've seen the attacks on him from day one. We saw the Russia hoax. We saw the Ukraine hoax. We saw the impeachment farce. And of course, now we're seeing this leading up. We saw it coming. We knew they were going to play these games. They telegraphed that before the election, and now we're seeing exactly what's involved and what they will try to do to remove that man and control the outcome of an election, so they can continue on with their agenda. It's extremely important for them to control the United States, and up until Donald Trump, they've been able to do that, and so that's why it's so important. So. Yeah, do elections play a huge role? It's the foundation of democracy. It's the foundation of Western civilization, once again. Free and fair elections. Everybody expects that, or at least we should. It's not about winning at all costs, as they're trying to convince us. It's about what the people want and what they're voting for. And once you start bringing in fraud and using computer programs to achieve that, that's a very slippery slope, and it's very, very dangerous.
Now we get to some of the tougher questions. How do Canadians keep this from happening?
Well, again, it's up to people like myself and yourself and others that are willing to have the discussion, that are willing to put themselves out there for their head to be chopped off, to be labeled conspiracy theorists, to be shamed and ridiculed. It's up to us to go power through that and get the message to the masses in any possible way. If the people understood, if they had the information, there would be a revolt. They would not accept this. They would understand what COVID's being used for. They would understand why pipelines aren't being built. They would understand why there's blockades in BC and across the country. they would understand everything that's happening is coming from the UN. And once they understand that, most Canadians will oppose it. And that's what we need, because ultimately the power is in the people. It's just that the people have never exercised that power. It's time that they do it. It's time they wake up. It's time they understand what's happening. And once they do, they will resist and they will refuse and reject all of this. I can't imagine any Canadian who understands this that would accept global governance from a socialist, communist ideation. I can't wrap my head around that most Canadians would approve of that. I know that they would resist. So again, it's information is power. The people need the information so they can exercise their power.
Could there be a network of evil that exists around the world?
Yeah, I think, in some cases, some people conflate that, but I think there is, researching this, you go down a lot of rabbit holes, and it gets very dark and creepy at the bottom of these rabbit holes. But there is something to it. There is, there are groups of people, and again, this whole agenda that we're talking about was started by a small group of people, sponsored by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and even Pierre Elliott Trudeau was involved. Maurice Strong got involved. So there is this group of people, and I think you can put Klaus Schwab as in the common modern day version. But these names have been and have existed since inception of this agenda. So is there a small group of people that are pulling the strings? Absolutely. Does the World Economic Forum exist? Yes, it does. Does the Trilateral Commission exist? Yes, it does. Does the Bilderberg Group exist? Yes, it does. The Council on Foreign Relations? Yes, it does. So all of these entities are playing a role. I don't think there is this, group that sits around one table and they conspire all of these things together. I think it's a collective thing. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different entities, but they are all still moving in the same direction. And it all comes originally from, as I said, the Club of Rome and their whole idea around sustainable development. So, it does exist. I just don't think it's in the vision that some people would like to see it as. But there's definitely a few of the elites that have enormous influence on what's happening in the world.
How do we get Canada back on its feet and make it prosperous?
Cut the head off the snake. And the snake being the UN and the UN agenda, the Great Reset, whatever they want to call it. Cut the head off. Completely denounce it, reject it 100%. Take back control of your country. Govern your country for the benefit of Canadians. Protect the borders. Ensure the environment exists for small business to prosper. Create an environment for our resources to be extracted responsibly, as we always have, and we continue to get better at. We lead the world in that. Be active on the world trade scene. Get our resources to Tidewater. Get our resources to these markets that need what we have. Listen, we're a country of 37 million people in an enormous geographical location with enormous resources. We're extremely resource rich. We should be leading the world in GDP based on population. We should be leading the world in prosperity, in standard of living. I mean, you look at Norway. Norway is a really good example, and some people say, well, they're socialist, and there is some socialism there, but the only reason they can afford that socialism and those socialist programs is because of their very strong oil and gas sector, which they export, an enormous amount for the size of their population. So they're filthy rich, as they should be. They're taking advantage of the situation that they're in, and in turn can then afford these social programs that everyone seems to love, which is fantastic. If that's what the population wants, great, but we have to be able to afford it. In order to be able to afford it, we have to cut the head off the snake, get away from the UN, get away from this UN agenda, work with partners throughout the world, as more and more of these countries are waking up and going more nationalist. That doesn't mean they're going to be insular. It doesn't mean that they're going to not partake in the world economy. It just means that they're going to control what's in the best interest of that country. And Canada should be no different. We could be, like I said, the most wealthy country on the planet with our standard of living high, eradicate poverty, get the reserve situation, well, in my opinion, get rid of the Indian Act altogether, and let's move forward. Let's take care of our people here in Canada, and then we'll move forward and see what we can do to help the rest of the world. But let's take care of Canada first.
Are you planning to run for the People's Party of Canada in the next federal election?
Yeah, I have committed to that. The party asked me if I would run again, and I committed to running again, whenever that might be. We're in pretty critical times right now, and I truly hope we make it as a nation to the next election. I'm that concerned and that anxious about what's going on. But if that comes, then I will definitely run for the PPC. Listen, they're the only federal party that represents my values and in the greater sense Canadian values, again, of freedom, liberty, justice, prosperity, and the like. It's the only party that represents that, and the default to all of this is we're the only party that stands against the globalist agenda. We're the only party that stands against globalism and the sustainable development agenda and the Great Reset. We're the only party that stands against that. We want to see our country prosper. We need to prosper first. We need to take care of our own first before we start continue sending billions overseas when we have a $1 trillion debt. So, you know what? It's the only party that exists, and if we're going to resolve this situation politically, it's the only choice people should be making is the PPC. So, in that sense, of course, I will run again as a PPC candidate, and hopefully we're at a position where we've educated a lot of people and they've woken up and can vote with their mind instead of their heart.
Mark, where can people find out more about you online?
So I'm pretty active online. I have a live stream that I'm pretty regular on YouTube when I'm not deplatformed or banned. So you can find me there at the Grizzly Patriot. And a lot of these other alternative platforms I am on, like YouTube, DLive. I'm on there, and just again search Grizzly Patriot, you'll find me. Of course, I'm on Facebook. My organization is also on Facebook, Forum for Canadian Sovereignty. We have a website, which is www.ffcs.info, or you can get to it by www.stand4freedom.ca. So stand4freedom.ca. You can find us on the website, and that's, probably the most secure way to do that, because, it's pretty hard for them to shut down websites, although it's not impossible. So if people want to get in touch with us, that's probably the best way to go about it, is through the website. And I think that's probably about it. I'm on, every social media entity or platform that exists, because we need to get out. We need to protect ourselves to make sure we're still a presence, even though we're being banned on the mainstream platforms.
Mark, thank you so much for chatting with the Goddard Report.
No problem. My absolute pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
My guest has been Mark Friesen, the Grizzly Patriot fighting for freedom in Canada. He's the host of Live with Grizz on YouTube at Mark Friesen Grizzly Patriot FFCS. If you have any questions for Mark or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.